It's the 14th of September 2012. The Czech Minister of Health, Leoš Heger, has just announced that the country is going into an indefinite state of prohibition. All alcoholic drinks with over 20% ethanol are now banned. The reason for this ban is not moral outrage, but public safety. 19 people lay dead, and tens of others are fighting for their lives. All thanks to a bunch of greedy black market sellers who released adulterated alcohol into the streets. One of the worst mass methanol poisonings in recent memory happened in a small Central European country. This is the story of the people who caused it, those that stopped it, and the many victims whose lives were lost or destroyed by it. I'm Taper and Bike, and this story might bum you out. Part 1. The Evil Twin. So, what is methanol, and why can it be such a widespread problem? Chemically speaking, methanol belongs to the family of alcohols, which are organic compounds consisting of groups of oxygen and hydrogen attached to carbon atoms. Methanol is the simplest of these, and its formula is CH3OH. Methanol naturally occurs in our bodies. It can also be found in certain fruits or vegetables. However, these naturally occurring amounts tend to be very small and usually do not cause any health issues. The problems start when methanol appears in large quantities in places where it should not be. Along with ethanol, the key ingredient of alcoholic drinks, methanol is also a byproduct of fermentation. Good distillers take great care at making sure that only low, non-dangerous levels of methanol are produced during the fermentation process. And that's because, as opposed to the desirable buzz you get from ethanol, methanol can cause severe health issues, even death. A hazardous dose of methanol can end up in your drink in two main ways. Number 1, improper distillation techniques that concentrate methanol in the finished product. Usually that is caused by bacteria in the fermented fruit. This is why homemade alcohol can be very dangerous. And number 2, adding extra methanol into drinks as a more cost-effective alternative to ethanol. In essence, putting in the murder twin instead of the bus twin. Now remember this one because it will play a large role in this story. Why is methanol so dangerous? By itself, CH3OH is not very toxic. However, when ingested, or even inhaled or in contact with skin, it ends up breaking down into formaldehyde and then into formic acid. This causes your blood to turn highly acidic, which is very bad news for pretty much all your organs. Let's take a closer look at what acute methanol poisoning looks like. Within the first hour of methanol poisoning, your central nervous system gets a hit. You become uncoordinated and mildly cognitively impaired. In other words, you act exactly as if you'd just gotten drunk. After the fake drunkenness, an asymptomatic period starts and lasts up to 24 hours. Now, given the fact that methanol poisoning is fully treatable, but only if discovered within a roughly 30-hour window, the period without symptoms wastes a lot of precious time needed to get help. When the acid in your blood reaches a high enough level, it starts making you nauseous, causes terrible headaches, abdominal pain, and might lead to diarrhea. At this point, the chances of getting out healthy are slim to non-existent. If left untreated, methanol will also cause irreparable damage to your sight by destroying the ocular nerve, which often leads to complete blindness. Other debilitating symptoms include tremors, damage to various organs, seizures, and coma. In about a third of the cases, the result is death. And it takes only 30 milliliters of methanol, roughly 2 tablespoons or a shot glass, to be lethal. So, what's the treatment? If possible, patients with methanol poisoning will be given a medication called fomepizole, which acts as an antidote. However, another powerful antidote is ethanol. You heard that right. Giving a methanol-poisoned individual a drink of a strong spirit, at least 43% ethanol, will actually make them better. Not your usual treatment, but one that proves to be life-saving. The almost magical ability of booze to neutralize methanol in your system will come back into our story, but not in a positive way. Overall, ingestion of methanol is an extremely serious issue and needs to be treated as soon as possible. Otherwise, the possibility of death is very high. Before we move on, let me just give a little bit of good PR to methanol, as I have presented it in a rather dark light. Its main use is as an antifreeze and a solvent. For these purposes, it is highly effective. Methanol is also a fairly good fuel, especially for ships, and it might become an important alternative energy source in the future. In short, when it runs your yacht, it can be good. When it's running amok in your veins, it's usually very, very bad. Now, how the hell did methanol cause a prohibition in the early 2010s? Part 2. Market Forces. Us Czechs love our booze. We are probably most well known for the quality and the high rate of consumption of beer. Per capita, we tend to drink the most beer annually of any nation. However, while beer is the quintessential Czech alcoholic drink, this story mostly takes place in the Moravian Silesian region, where wine and harder liquor tend to prevail, especially when it comes to manufacturing. There is a long tradition of home distilling in Moravia, which is a region in the southeastern part of the Czech Republic. If you ever get to spend some time with a Moravian, you might get offered slivovitz, a plum spirit usually quite high in alcohol content. Whilst you can buy slivovitz in a shop, lots of people are very proud of their own plum or other fruit concoctions. Trust me, I am a Moravian. That stuff is a spirit, but also a spirit breaker. As we have already established, non-professional distilling can lead to potentially lethal batches of alcoholic drinks. And yet, the cause of the prohibition of 2012 was not the result of some Moravian uncle sharing his homemade booze. The group responsible was well organized, had a lot of reach, and operated on a massive scale. When you want to get your drink on, where do you go? In Moravia in 2012, especially if you couldn't afford much, the answer might be a local pub, a small non-chain grocery store, or a tiny corner kiosk that sells everything you need. Newspapers, matches, cigarettes, and booze. All for a suspiciously low price. The cheapness of the drinks on offer was the result of a very well-established black market. The companies legally producing liquor were losing large sums of money because they could not compete with black market prices. By extension, the state was also losing billions of Czech crowns in taxes. It's necessary to understand that the majority of the black market was just that, a huge tax evasion scam, where the mark was the government. The method was straightforward. Declare the bought, often imported ethanol as being used for industrial purposes. This comes with a much smaller tax burden than ethanol bought for the purpose of manufacturing consumables. It also comes with the expectation that the ethanol will be denatured, which means adding chemicals that make it foul-smelling and tasting, as well as coloring it, usually to a light blue color. The process of denaturing in this case was simply skipped. The misdeclared ethanol was illegally used as a base for making a variety of alcoholic drinks, complete with fake branding that made it possible to sell in normal grocery stores. Sometimes, prospective black marketeers would also take already denatured ethanol and mix it with sodium hypochlorite, which is the main ingredient of bleach. This would then turn it back into consumable ethanol. Obviously, this is not safe and could result in negative health outcomes for the eventual consumer. Luckily, most people who drank cheap alcohol coming from the black market encountered the taxation scam one, which was illegal, but medically speaking perfectly fine, or at least as much as drinking alcohol can be. The main player in the alcohol black market was Radek Březina, a former chemical engineering student who built his empire during his studies. Over the years, he essentially took over the whole of the Moravian illegal alcohol market, and even supplied legit liquor companies with his ill-gotten ethanol. There was more to Březina than just knowledge of chemicals and undercutting prices. He was ruthless, and if he was not able to bribe somebody, intimidation and violence would do just fine. For example, he was charged with, but never convicted of, a kidnapping. Allegedly, he kidnapped and held a young man for 9 months, keeping him cuffed to a tractor tire, all because he had disagreement over business with his father. Going against Březina was thus known to be a foolish thing to do, and he ruled the black market with an iron hand. So, how do you become a market disruptor in this illegal business? Enter, finally, Rudolf Fian and Tomáš Křepela, the two main characters and antagonists of this story. Křepela owned a company which on paper produced car care products, such as antifreeze. In reality, most of the ethanol he bought would end up on the black market, turned into alcoholic drinks. Fian was his employee, and in 2012 they found themselves discussing the magical properties of ethanol as an antidote for the dangerous methanol. According to Fian, his boss Křepela told him that a 1-to-1 solution of ethanol and methanol would be totally healthy, as the two would cancel each other out. This would also make manufacturing illegal alcohol way easier, because substituting half of the ethanol with methanol would save a lot of money. Fian later tested this idea with a little experiment and mixed himself a bottle of this 1-to-1 solution. He did not drink it, but trusted his eyes and sense of smell to determine that this, in fact, highly poisonous mixture was totally fine. A simple and deadly business idea was born. Křepela used his contacts to buy large quantities of both methanol and ethanol, and together they prepared around 15,000 liters of their lethal mix. All they needed now was a distributor, who they found in Jiří Vacula, an experienced black marketeer. Vacula was not told of the chemical nature of the illegal booze he was given. The only info provided by Fian was, quote, "There's some shit in it." This was apparently fine with Vacula, who then proceeded to sell vats of the poison to his underground contacts in the illegal alcohol world. For Křepela and Fian, this was essentially a test of the market. If all went well, they would become rich by buying much cheaper methanol and mixing it with ethanol, thus undercutting the undercutters when it came to price. It did not go well. Part 3. Prohibitive Cost. A 62-year-old man in Havířov bought some of the deadly mixture, most likely turned into low-quality rum, in a small kiosk near his home. On the 3rd of September 2012, he died in the local hospital, and 3 days later so did his 59-year-old partner, who also drank some of the rum with him. The Havířov hospital quickly became the epicenter of the poisoning cases. After toxicology determined that the victims died of methanol consumption, it didn't take long to trace the tainted alcohol back to the same small kiosk where the first victim bought it. Sadly, that was not the only source of Fian's lethal concoction. Poisoned patients started showing up all over Moravia, as well as other Czech regions, and eventually even in the neighboring states of Poland and Slovakia. The situation was chaotic and called for a swift action. Luckily, the government and the police took it seriously. On the 7th of September, a statewide inspection of all alcohol sellers began. It ended only after they scoured some 28,000 stores, warehouses, and kiosks, which could possibly have some of the lethal methanol mixture. The police president established a special investigative unit called Metil on the 11th of September. Their two main goals were finding the people responsible and confiscating the poisoned batch of alcohol. Surprisingly, the police quickly found out that the black marketeers themselves were more than happy to speak to them. See, killing is bad for business. As soon as the methanol poisonings became news, and it was clear that black market alcohol was the culprit, the collective shitting of pants began. Both the police and the criminals wanted to root out the responsible parties. The police in the pursuit of justice, the black marketeers in pursuit of their lost cushy status quo. While the detectives were following promising leads, the government had to try and stem the tide of poisoned victims. At first, a simple warning was given, not to drink alcohol from non-reputable sources. On the 13th of September, the sale of alcohol with over 30% ethanol was prohibited, but only in small kiosks. It only took a day to widen the prohibition to a complete ban on the sale of alcohol with over 20% ethanol in it. The full prohibition would last for 2 weeks, and when the ban was lifted, it only allowed sellers to stock alcohol provably manufactured in the year 2011 and earlier. I do not praise my government often as a Czech, but I will say that the prohibition was the correct move. And it caused a lot of friction. The grumbling came not only from the consumers of hard liquor, but also from the manufacturers, distributors, and sellers of it. Plus, the state was losing millions of crowns in taxes daily. Oh, and speaking of losing money in taxation, thanks to the effort to find the source of the tainted alcohol, the police were able to find hundreds of thousands of liters of non-poisoned, but still illegally obtained ethanol. One of the favorite tricks of the so-called ethanol mafia was walling in vats of the illegal alcohol in their warehouses. This meant that when the police started seriously looking into these warehouses, they realized that the inside ended tens of meters before the whole length of the building. All the officers needed after that realization were hammers and elbow grease. Eventually, the godfather of the ethanol mafia, Radek Březina, was arrested in his own hotel, hiding in a pile of sawdust in a boiler room. According to investigative reporter Josef Klima, Březina was under the influence of sedatives and in real danger of suffocating in his hidey hole if the police hadn't found him. Thus, the poisonings helped to unravel one of the biggest illegal ventures in the whole country. But what about the poisoners themselves? On the same day as the prohibition was announced, the police chased down the car of the main distributor, Jiří Vacula. His son was supposed to get married the next day, and I guess he was hoping to avoid jail till at least the reception. We can only assume that when asked if he knew the people who prepared the deadly poison, his answer was, "I do." Both Fian and Křepela were apprehended soon after Vacula, and it didn't take police too long to completely figure out the whole story. Worryingly though, 2,000 liters of the poisoned alcohol were never recovered. I hope they will never resurface, because that could mean more deaths. Experts later determined that if all of their lethal mixture was released on the market and consumed, up to 150,000 people could have died, about 1.5% of the population of Czech Republic today. Part 4. The Blame Game. 31 people were arrested and charged with public endangerment in connection with the methanol poisonings. The main culprits, Fian and Křepela, received life in prison, the highest possible penalty allowed in Czech law. The distributor Vacula fully cooperated, and for his cooperation he received a lower sentence of 15 years. 28 other defendants were given between 5 to 9 years. The ethanol mafia case, while not directly tied to the poisonings, led to many arrests as well. The leader, Radek Březina, was given 15 years in prison. More interestingly, this case also allowed investigators to figure out why the black market was so successful. The reason turned out to be good old corruption within the police, at both the very high and the rather low levels. We now know that officers at customs would simply look the other way when dealing with illegal shipments of ethanol, and so would the head of the organized crime unit in the city of Zlín, Březina's residence and main area of operations. These corrupt police officers, among them Březina's cousin, were all apprehended and are now either in prison or awaiting trial. And what about the victims? The exact number of deaths varies slightly based on the source, but we can confidently say that at least 48 people lost their lives due to the methanol-poisoned batch of alcohol. The youngest one was a 16-year-old girl. At least 80 other people survived the poisoning, but have to live with lifelong health issues. Who were these victims? There is no clear profile, and that is something to keep in mind when evaluating this case. The media, especially outside of Czech Republic, often insinuated that at least a small part of the blame lies with the victims themselves, because they knowingly put their lives at risk by drinking suspiciously cheap alcohol. Let me put a clear stop to such victim blaming. Methanol poisonings are sadly not a rare thing. Most often they happen in developing countries or in poorer regions, such as the Moravian Silesian region, where the Czech poisoning took place. Let me quickly list some cases from the last few years. 2013, Libya, 51 people dead. 2015, India, 90 people dead. 2018, Malaysia, 45 people dead. 2020, Morocco, 21 people dead. 2022, Peru, 54 people dead. 2023, Russia, 30 people dead. This list is far, far from exhaustive. As you can see, methanol poisoning is a global problem. It also disproportionately affects people with lower socioeconomic status. That's because all negative effects of alcohol can be disproportionately found in people with lower socioeconomic status. Plainly stated, if you can afford expensive booze, you are less likely to be poisoned by it and more likely to find help if you are. Being poor and having unhealthy coping mechanisms is not a crime. Wanting to have a drink with your friends is not a crime. Unwinding with a glass of alcohol whilst watching TV is not a crime. And yet, at least 48 people received what amounts to the death penalty for these non-crimes. All thanks to a bunch of greedy assholes who, by the way, made less than $3,000 from the whole ordeal. They, and only they, should get all of the blame. Part 5. Sources and other stuff. Thank you so much for watching and listening to me ramble. This is my very first video and I'm sure you can tell. Let me know if you would like to hear more about the weird goings-on of the Czech Republic. We are a small country, but occasionally some wild shit happens here. You can find the full list of sources in the description, but I would like to especially mention a few that truly helped me put this video together. I extensively relied on 2 theses written on the topic from the Faculty of Law of Maastricht University, which guided me through the whole case. These are 2012 methanol poisonings in Czechia and prevention of their recurrence by Andrea Zatočilová, and Substantive and procedural aspects of the methanol affair in the Czech Republic by Petra Valachová. The online article A Story of the Methanol Killers by Iveta Svobodová from the investigative magazine Respect was of great help as well, especially when it comes to the connections to the so-called ethanol mafia. For science, I relied most heavily on the fantastic book Challenges of Methanol Mass Poisoning Outbreaks by Sergei Zakharov. You can find the link to buy a physical or digital version of the book in the description, but it might require a Czech account. Most of the non-stock footage used comes from either the public broadcaster Czech television or publicly available police sources. Thank you again, and I hope that you were not bummed out too much. Tapeworm Bike out.